Many former members of Team Trump 2016 could find themselves back in the White House following the inauguration in January next year. Well, especially those who've criticised the treatment Trump has endured during his legal cases. Well, former Republican Congressman George Santos has continued to show support for his former president, who he worked with in the last administration. And earlier this year, publicly made a pitch to work for Trump's administration as a director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
But could former Republican Congressman George Santos be one of them? Well, let's speak to him now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Santos. You, of course, have some legal woes of your own, but let's focus on Donald Trump, who's got plenty of legal issues hanging over him. How do you think he's managed to pull off this second non-consecutive term at the White House?
Well, Tom and Laura, thank you so much for having me. I think, look, the American people are the reason President Trump is now President-elect Trump once again. I think it was clear evidence that the American people didn't buy the lawfare wagered against the former president, now president-elect. And overkill from the Democrats and the Biden-Harris administration displayed that they had disdain for the rule of law and that they had no problem weaponizing government. That is why President Trump was able to overcome not only his legal weaponized charges, but also to convince Americans all across the country and flip every single swing state in his favor, from the Rust Belt all the way to the Arizona and Nevada desert. I think it's very telling that the American people saw right through the weaponized government and the lack of delivery for the American people that the Biden administration had.
Okay, now one of the big stories of today, of course, has been the trickle of announcements regarding top jobs in the Trump administration. Just curious to know, have you been in touch with anyone in the Team Trump?
I have not. I have barely slept over the last 72 hours as I've been doing a lot of these coverages. I was covering the story internationally, the election internationally on election night in the UK. And I've been doing a set of these interviews because I think it's important to communicate to the entire world. The United States is back. We are back with peace. We are back with resolve to solve the chaos and fire that the world is on. So I have not had yet time to speak to anybody in Team Trump, but I look forward to speaking to them in due time.
Earlier on in the year, I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you'd like to head up ICE, which is, of course, the immigration body. And clearly immigration was such a huge issue on the campaign trail. Now, were you to get that job, how would you approach it? And in particular, there's this challenge that Donald Trump has set out regarding mass deportations. I just want to know how you see that working.
Look, I look at it this way. The United States today has approximately 3 million people with removal proceedings letters. These are people who had their immigration courts heard, their immigration cases, heard and adjudicated by an immigration judge. And they've gone through the appeal process and it's been turned down. And they are set for removals proceedings. Based on our honor system, they have yet to self-deport. So I think it's only fair to say that it wouldn't be too much of a burdensome job to find those who have actually had their day in court and do not meet the standards or qualifications to remain in this country permanently or lawfully, and to remove them. And that on its own should be a lot of time. And on the latter part of your question, with all the other immigrants and immigrant issues we've had under the last 4 years, this disastrous border crisis, it's a sensible touch and go position. However, we will probably be working as a team, as Republicans in government with control of every branch of government, to find resolutions and solutions to give these people a peace of mind that we will try to find remedies to perhaps create paths to residency for them. However, nothing is guaranteed because at the end of the day, everything will pin back to who you are as an individual. So these cases will be looked individually. ICE's job is not so hard. You have 3 million people, get them gone. They do not belong in the United States. And I think that's a fair statement for any sovereign nation that's trying to protect its sovereignty. If you give these people the right to an adjudication and they fail to adjudicate it in the court of law and they have a negative outcome, they should be removed.
Mr. Santos, how will you deal with officials that refuse to cooperate, like the governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey? She says she won't comply.
Well, it's not a matter of complying. ICE has the authority and autonomy to operate in all 50 states. It's a federal agency. She cannot shut them down. Clearly, she won't help us with local law enforcement sharing data or actually doing ICE holds in, minor domestic disputes where they end up in custody overnight for, nonsense. However, we don't need the cooperation. We have the information. The federal government has the ability to track and settle down those people. And there's targeted communities with clusters all around the country that are hotspots and hotbeds for the cluster of these people with removals proceedings levied against them. So it doesn't matter when you have the governor of Massachusetts or California saying they won't comply. ICE still has the constitutional authority to operate in those states.
Is the return of Donald Trump good or bad news for America?
I think that Donald Trump is the best news for America and the best news for the world. The Middle East is on fire. Donald Trump got elected, and a day after, you see Hamas already starting to call for we should go into a ceasefire. I mean, this couldn't be clearer that peace through strength is important, and that people like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are going to be scared of a President Trump presidency, as well as the Ayatollah. Tehran's on the run. They don't know what to do. They're absolutely frightened that Trump's return to the White House. And that's the best outcome for global peace.
I just want to ask you, Mr. Santos, about something on the campaign trail that seemed to be a big deal at the time. Obviously, it feels like a distant memory now. I'm talking about Garbagegate. And I just want to ask you why you think Garbagegate ultimately really didn't seem to have a huge amount of impact on Trump. Obviously, he won, and he also won quite conclusively amongst various demographics, including certain demographics of Latino voter.
Well, look, as a Latino voter myself, I can say it was a bad taste comedy done by a comic who had no business being at a campaign rally. That said, those were not the words or sentiment of President Trump displayed throughout the course of his first presidency or the entirety of this campaign that lasted a whopping 2 years. But the reality is that Democrats were grasping for air at any possibility of trying to derail the campaign. But here's the problem. Following that, President Biden turned around and called President Trump and his supporters, which is largely half of America, garbage. The sitting president of the United States, in the sense of Garbagegate, called half of the American population garbage. So a lot of these things backfired because the reality is they weren't hiding their true sentiments, and they were trying to tie other people's speeches to President Trump, and it failed.
Trump's also been talking about facing an enemy from within. Who or what is he referring to here?
Well, I believe it's the radical administration of Biden-Harris who weaponized government, not against only him, but all of their political enemies and rivals, which that does make them the enemy within. But I don't think that means that's the American people. I think that's an administration of rogue individuals willing to do what it takes to win political office. And that does become a threat to democracy. Unlike them calling President Trump a threat to democracy, they displayed threatening behavior and actions to our democracy here in America. But today, America wakes up every single day up until January 20th, a day closer back to restoring common sense, freedom, and peace through strength around the world.
Donald Trump says he's planning to dismantle what he's calling the deep state. And I've seen some things on your X feed that suggest perhaps you actually agree with that. And if that is the case, perhaps you could tell us what dismantling the deep state actually would entail.
The expectation is that by the end of fiscal year 2025, 50% of the bureaucratic state of America is dismantled by seeing redundancies being cut, excess waste of taxpayer dollars into frivolous salaries being cut, and reducing our deficit so that we can stop imploding our debt, which is ballooned to $35 trillion at this point. So it's a matter of cleaning house, having an efficiently run government, tight with close margins and little waste. So that's why I'm very enthusiastically excited to see the DOGE Department of Government Efficiency, head up by Elon Musk, be enacted, because that's exactly what they will do. And that's the expectation that I and many Americans have, is to reduce the size of the federal government.
Okay, so when we hear rumors about this so-called enemies list, I'm just curious to know what your take is on that and who you think should perhaps be most worried about its existence.
Well, look, I don't think there's a real enemy list. There's no Gestapo type approach to this. The reality is President Trump's just going to move on and govern for the American people. Democrats want to levy that ideology that, oh, he has a Gestapo list and he's going to try to settle scores. I actually highly doubt that will happen. And I highly doubt that he'll allow his attorney general to weaponize the office of the attorney general in the Department of Justice against Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or any of his former political rivals. I think this is about moving forward. And I think that's exactly what President Trump is going to do.
He's been talking a lot about uniting the country. How is he planning on doing this?
Well, I think he showed that throughout the campaign. Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., podcast superstar Joe Rogan. These are all people who ideologically have sparred with President Trump in the past. I mean, and in some cases have even voted to impeach him. The reality is that he's been able to join these people together on a common sense wagon. And I think what we saw was an enormous growth of various coalitions across the country in growing to support President Trump based on unity. This was the great unity tour. This was the great unity ticket. And we totally show that when the American people complied and subscribed to the unity ideology that the Trump campaign was presenting to them. And therefore, I think President Trump will continue on that beat moving forward as he continues to embody and embrace everyone and every single person of every political and ideology within the spectrum.
And what's the likelihood that we'll see a more, let's say, serious Donald Trump this time around?
Well, look, if Donald Trump becomes too serious, he ceases to be Donald Trump. Donald Trump is by de facto an entertainer, right? But he's also a great businessman, a titan who rebuilt the skyline of Manhattan in New York City. So the way I'll put it to you is, I think we already have a serious Donald Trump. We're just going to have a more intelligent Donald Trump who knows how the government works this time around, more so than he did in 2016, not allowing himself to be swamped by swamp characters and creatures within his administration. So a first good sign of that is the appointment of Susie Wild, the first ever female chief of staff to the President of the United States.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Republican Congressman George Santos, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Tom.